Hello again, and welcome to the fourth part of our Drawing with Particles project. We're going to pick up pretty much where we left off, and just to recap, if I just turn the particles off of our, and I just scrub through, we were spray painting our stencil, we spray painted our logo onto the container, and it leaves a nice logo in the sort of on the surface. In this one, we're going to actually add some extra stuff. We're going to add some graffiti, so I'm going to actually have it. We're going to go back to our original setup that we started off a few videos ago, and we're going to use that to spray on just like we've done with the stencil, but this time it's just going to be free form. And some other things as you can see, I've got a scene, so we've got some extra containers everywhere, bit of context to our scene, and I've even gone as far as adding a camera in there, just a predefined camera. You can create your own. This is actually baked down, so I had a bit of noise added to it and that kind of stuff. I'm just keeping it nice and simple and focusing on the particle stuff for this one. And what else do we have? We have the spray can. So I've got a viewport material on this one, but yeah, we've got a spray can. And this is, just so that when we spray the particles, so if I turn our emitter back on, when we spray our particles, I press play, there we go. We've actually got something actually, physical, even though it's floating in space, to kind of reference and look cool like that. Okay, so I think that's probably the first thing we'll do. We could cache the particles. We're definitely going to be doing that. So one thing I might do is I might actually start unifying the colors, and sort of it doesn't really matter because we'll be able to change these entirely when we come to the rendering and materials. But it's just nice whilst we're working to kind of have an idea of what it's going to look like. So I'm thinking for the particles for this first logo, instead of it being white, something that looks good on a blue container would be a kind of a yellowy, there we go, something like that. And then the stencil group, it doesn't matter so much about these anymore because I'm probably going to just kill them off when we cache our particles. So what else? We've got so that's the particle color. Let's jump into this one, I believe the stencil material. Let's call this stencil. I might call this VP stencil. I put VP for viewport sometimes just to kind of get a better idea. So that's currently, what have I got set up? I've got a fusion material. Do you know what? I'm just going to make that a solid color. It's a bit overcomplicated. Let's make that yellow, the same yellow. In fact, what we could do, go into the color, go into the palettes here, and I could just drag that down there, and we call this stencil. Stencil paint. Just then I can reference that color and pick it up every time I need to go back to it. And again, like I said, we can tweak all of these colors on the render stage. This is purely for viewport. I like to keep things, pretty close to what they're going to look like. It just helps get a feel for things. So we're going back into our material, and this time we're going to double click our yellow material here. Let's just scrub along. I might just maybe just turn the emitter off whilst I scrub. And there we go. We've got that nice yellow material coming on, and the base material. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to have this as a metallic material, like a steel or some kind of foil. So for now, I'm just going to make that a darker grey. There you go, nice and easy, nice and simple. Now, obviously, we need to make sure the material on the being painted onto the surface, I think it's this one here, container wet map. Remember, we've got an alpha here with the vertex map. So the color just needs to be set in here. We don't need that noise. That was just a bit of experimenting. There we go. If I go to the palettes, stored palettes, there we go, same color. So what I like about this is that it's quite messy at the beginning, just like it would be in real life. And then you get this sort of, it's a bit hard to read it. I mean, we're going to have shadows and stuff, so it will be easier to read than this. But then as it peels off, it leaves us that lovely color. Now, when we do the actual materials, we'll have a back material for this as well, so we'll deal with that. But that's not till the rendering part, so I'll leave that for now. Excellent. So we've got our spray paint being spray painted onto the side, and that's looking cool. So now we've got the colors on that setup. Let's take a look at actually animating this can. So currently we've got the spray paint coming out of the emitter there. And if you recall, the emitters are all utilizing this stencil. So this cloner that moves our piece of geometry, our emission geometry, along those splines and targets them as well. Well, we can actually utilize this same cloner and then it'll match that animation exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to call it cloner, and I'm going to call it stencil, but then spray can at the end as well. And then I'm just going to clear that out. Now it's got all the animation keyframes, so when I drag this spray can into here, you'll see my spray can jumps over to there, and obviously it's not the right part, but if you see, we can see it is animating. Now it's animated, it looks a bit weird at the moment because there's no particles coming out to kind of match up, and also it's obviously clearly in the wrong orientation. So there's actually a few things I want to do to set that up to make it work and make it target our stencil emission object. So like I want it to target where it's going to look. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to just tweak a couple of things. So I'm going to turn align clone off. So this means it's going to stay vertical at the moment, just like that. You can see. But then I'm actually going to drive its, I mean, you could leave it like this. It'd be totally fine to leave it like that. Maybe add some wobble onto it. But if I go into our spray can, I've actually got this Mo spline here just to point to show us where it's pointing. If I actually extend that out, make that a bit longer. And I'll tell you what, let's put our emitter on and just let that play for a second. I might drop the particle count right down. When does that start? It starts at frame 100, so we can actually jump there. And there you go. Obviously, I'm going to have the can scale up or animate on. Probably just scale up to keep it nice and simple. And there we go. We can see the particles are going in the right direction, but the can, even though it's kind of starting off looked like it was in the right direction, is not following along anymore. So what I want to do is I want to actually use a couple of effectors to just target, to get the cloner to target the splines over here. So if you recall, we have these splines, we have this target spline. And so what I'm going to do, and remember this cloner here, this disk is actually running along this source spline. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to duplicate this one again. And it doesn't matter about the targeting here. I mean, I can turn the align clone off. I can actually get rid of the target because I don't need any rotation on this particular one. This is going to be called our can target. And this is going to be sat on this target spline. So I'm going to swap that one. This will all become pretty apparent in a second what I'm doing. Let me turn the emitter off just so we can get some playback. I could make this much larger as well, actually, just so we can see it. There you go, you can see it on there. Oh, and also, because I have my scene on the layers, I can actually hide the scene in the background here. So I can hide the scene like that and make it a bit cleaner. And if I actually uncheck all of these, I'll probably leave it in the OM. But if I uncheck all those and put the lock mark on, it just means that now we've got a nice clean scene to work with, and actually the performance is much better. So I should have done that earlier, but that's fine. So right now, what we need to do is we need to take this target and we need to have our spray can aim at that object. Now, there's a few ways we can do this, but I think the simplest one is to actually use a target effector, and then we're going to have a null attach itself to this disk, and then it can work that way. So it'll use the matrix from this object to drive a target for the spray can itself. So actually, let's create that target. So with the spray can cloner selected, add a target effector. And you'll see that straight away that snapped the spray can targeting our target effector. But I'm actually going to have it target a specific object. I'm going to use a null. So let's just add a null to our scene. And we'll call this spray can target. And then in our target object, we just assign that as our object. Just means I can animate that independently or have it move independently. So the next thing I want to do is I actually want this to follow this disk on here, this target over here. Now, by the way, I could make this a matrix object. I don't have to have any geometry here. So the reason that would be quite handy in this case is I could just have the, I don't need any geometry, but I'll just hide the disk when I need to render. But for now, let's take a look at the spray can target and let's add an espresso tag. This is how we're going to constrain it to this disk. So I'm going to go right click, Cinema 4D tags espresso. Now, if you can't find that tag, sometimes that menu is a bit large, just search it in the commander and you'll be able to add it from there. Now, what you'll be shown is this espresso editor window. And what I want to do is I want to add the elements that I'm going to be playing around with. So first of all, I'm going to be driving the global matrix of the spray can target. And then I'm also pulling the data from this cloner. So what you need to do, this is a handy thing to know, is you can attach objects, you can drive their global matrices by a clone's matrices. So what that means is I can grab the data, and what I'll do is I'll use if I open the system operators over here, I grab data, and then I'm going to pipe this object, which is our cloner. So I need to, first of all, in the output, add the object, and then you'll see it goes green, which means it accepts that kind of data. And then on this side, I could actually remove these no, they're defaults, but all I need is a global matrix, and I pipe that into the spray can target. So, and then that's into its own global matrix. And did you see it just jumped over in the viewport? Now, if I scrub along, we should see it follow along. There we go. So we are following along. We are seeing a bit of a lag behind, and that's because these often require sort of some priorities work. So this should probably be happening after the generators. So we can just change this to generators 499. Just means it happened last. That's not particularly helped. To be honest, I don't think it's going to be too much of a problem in our scenario. I might fix that a little bit later on, but for now, it's going to work pretty much perfectly for our scenario. Probably going to cache this out anyway. The only reason that would be a problem is if this aiming rod was perfectly aligned with our emitter. So I'm not too worried about that. I just want it to be roughly facing the right direction. Otherwise, it's going to look really weird. So what else can I do with this setup? Well, there's a couple of things. I want to add maybe some just gentle extra motion to the spray can. So if I just, I'm going to turn that mouse spline off for now, the guide one. Yeah, so at the moment it's kind of, it's aligning, it's pitching and moving with the target, but it needs a bit more sort of inertia, a bit more kind of random motion or sort of gentle sort of swaying and stuff. So I'm going to add a random effector, and I'm going to change that. I'm probably going to change it to noise. Let's try that to start with. Now I might play around with the speed on that, but it probably will stay at default. Let's see what that default, that does position movement, so we don't want that. We just want it to do rotation. And let's put that mouse spline back on. Really, all I'm doing here is just getting it to aim roughly in the right direction so that we can have it make sure it sort of looks like it's spraying. That's cool. The random motion isn't very obvious. I think maybe add some more on the bank so it's... there we go. So you can see it's kind of rocking. That's actually not too bad. That's beyond the point that we'd have it on screen, but that's fine. What about when it first comes on? Yeah, just a gentle kind of rocking. So there's two more things. I want to scale it up and I want to scale it down just as it kind of comes in and comes off. And also I might add some delay to it. So let's do the scaling on and off. That's quite a simple one. Now I can do that a few ways. I could just animate the transform in the cloner object itself, or I can just add a plane effector, MoGraph effector, plane effector. Now by default that's going to move it position, but if I do scale, uniform scale, -1, just to basically shrink it to 0, and then I don't really need to use a fall off or anything magical here. I can use the effector in its most basic form and just use it as a slider to scale it up and down. It just keeps it nice and easy. If I actually rename that scale. So we actually want to start off with it at full strength. And then I actually want to animate it up at a certain point. I think probably just before it comes on. So probably like, yeah, so the emitter starts moving at frame 100. If I start scaling up at 80, go to the frame 100 and then scale down. Oh, sorry, scale up actually, sort of counterintuitively. There we go. So up it comes. And then we're going to do the same at the other end when it's finished, which I think was it 390. That's probably in the emitter, isn't it? So maybe it was 400. So okay, so the emission finishes at 390. I'll tell you what, I'll turn the emitter on, scrub back a few frames. Away that goes. And you can see it's going in the right direction, which is good. And then we stop the emission at 390. That fades away. I think we can start scaling down about here. So let's go back a few frames. Go another 20 frames. And there she goes. Scales down. And we remember for this chapter, we're actually going to be doing the graffiti. So what we'll be doing is we will be duplicating all of this stuff that we're doing and just transferring it to different splines, slightly different timing, that kind of thing. What we could do is we could actually package up this in one sort of nice clean folder. So what I could do is just add a subfolder in the other objects. And then which ones do we need? We need the spray can, stencil, and then the target. Yeah, we need that. I could put the target up top actually. There we go. And we can call this spray can stencil rig. There we go. That just means when I duplicate all of this, all of these links will stay relative, and it means that I can just swap stuff out for our graffiti one. And of course, you could drag this into other projects, all sorts of cool stuff like that. So let's just double check where we were. Yep. So we added the random motion. We're scaled up, scaled down. I should probably start caching my particles soon, actually, just so that we can get a really good feel for things. Let's turn off our guide. And I tell you what, now we probably say that we have a bit of delay, so a bit of spring delay. So I'm going to go back to our spray can cloner and let's add a delay effector. Now you can play around with this. You could manually animate this, so you could actually have this animated, but obviously we've already baked that animation into the emitter and stuff. So I want to just utilize that animation. We don't have to think about it too hard. And then we get the nice motion for free. For free, I say, sort of. So let's change this to spring. And I want it to have a really high spring motion. So 90, well, let's see if that might be too much. And I only want it on the rotation. I've played around with these settings before, so I might be a bit off, or I nailed it first time, maybe. Okay, there we go. So it's swinging around. That's working pretty well. This guy is pretty adept with their spray can aiming. Got to give him some credit there. Okay, cool. Now, one thing to note, by the way, is I've actually rigged this can up so that it can just it can operate. If I just hide this. And we jump to the can over here. You'll see it's this color blue. Now, the color is actually coming from the display color of our object here. So if I change this, I've got a bit of an espresso rig that should change that. Oh no, it's just utilizing the object color. So whatever the object color is, currently set to automatic, and I've got the display color here. If I change this, you can see we get to see that as a different color. Same with this one, and so on. Now, when it goes into a cloner actually assigns it some color. So if I press the check mark there, you can see it's actually assigned it the color. Let's take that delay off, actually. It's actually setting it behind a bit. Yeah, it's kind of offsetting it a bit too much there. Also, it looks like our can might be offset somewhat. So let's just, I think I'm just going to change where the, yeah. So can you see where the emitter is currently set back a little bit? And that's just purely because I set my spray can 0 to be in the center of it, where I should really have it facing forward a little bit there. So if I turn that cloner back on, the offset should be a bit more manageable. There we go. Cool. Make sure the target is on. Random. There we go. Now, with the shot that I've chosen, we're quite far out. So as long as it's as close as possible, that's cool. Excellent. I could, of course, just make it a child of the target itself, but I think that would probably be too erratic, and it wouldn't allow us to add the secondary kind of motion in. Okay, so I'm actually pretty happy with how that's looking. I think if we should start thinking about caching the particles. Oh yeah, that was it. I was talking about the color, wasn't I? Sorry, got sidetracked. So in the transform tab of the cloner is where we can set the color. So this particular one, we're going to probably set it as our display color. So, oh, hang on a sec. It should be changing that color. Let's double check. That's possibly because I've set it in here. So let's just... it's, well, sorry. So because I've got materials on there already, they're not displaying. So if I... let's go back to the beginning. I wonder if our delay is interfering a bit. Oh, I know. I know exactly what I've done. So it's always good to leave. I think I'm going to leave this in because it's always good to see these sort of moments and see how I get out of them. Well, I've got a plane effector in, and a plane will actually dictate the color if you've got it in default mode fields color. So if I turn that off, there we go. Now our materials are all based off the cloner color. So let's add our yellow in there so everything matches up. There we go. And we can turn our emitter off for a minute just to get things moving a bit quicker. There we go. And you can see our can's kind of flipping all over the place. A bit too aggressively perhaps. But what I can do is I can actually do a MoGraph cache on this. So to make sure that delay is always consistent and smooth, I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to where is it? MoGraph tags, MoGraph cache, and just bake that down. Just all that means is that our can will be baked down. It'll be, it doesn't rely anymore on the delay effector, so that I can scrub the timeline and it'll be in the correct position that I want it to be in. Okay, lots of caching in this project. There's always lots of caching. It's a good workflow. So if I turn all these off now and I move along, you'll see it still animates along as if it was being affected. Cool. So that is our spray can. That's the first part. The second part is we're going to cache the particles here. We're also going to do a couple of other things. If you recall, we actually have the stencil collider, and when it hits the stencil collider, a bunch of actions are triggered, and it's the same with the container collider. Well, this time we're actually going to turn off a bunch of these because we don't need them anymore. We don't need it to change groups. We're not creating a wet map here. So I'm going to turn off these two actions here, the freeze particles action and the group action. We're going to create some separately for the graffiti one. But the change life action, if I double click it, I can just change this mode from the set lifespan, the relative lifespan. Actually, it's probably safer to create another one. I'm just going to duplicate that, and I'm going to call this kill, change life action, kill particles. And then let's go back to our collider tags and drop those in. I can turn that one off, remember. And then same with this one. Don't need any of these, just need it to do the kill action. And then I can actually turn these groups off. We don't need those. Turn our emitter on, press play. So all I'm doing here is as the particles collide, it's killing them, because we're giving the simulation the illusion via the wet map that the particle is sticking to it. So once that's done, it's not a problem. So if we look here, on cons our crazy looking can, starts spraying on, and then those particles vanish completely, but they leave, of course, the wet map behind. There we go. And so these are going to be our rendered particles, and we're going to need way more of these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably pump the number of them quite significantly. So, and I'm just going to make sure I'm going to cache in. So in the emitter, make sure it's 0.1 radius, that's fine. Currently we're doing 40,000 per second. I think we can go crazy. We could probably 5 times that. So if we'd said 200,000. I want it to be really, really dense, as if it was fine particles. Other methods, we could use exposure effects and stuff like that for fine to make it look like a mist. For our scenario, I'm just going to stick with the particles because that's actually what's creating the wet map here. Okay, so you can see that's already much denser in the viewport, and I'm pretty happy that that is in the right location. It's hitting there nicely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to cache this. Hopefully by now we know the drill. So we go to other objects, we add an XP cache. I'm actually going to call this XP cache underscore NE logo spray paint, I guess. Just naming the cache means I'll get the folders named very similarly. I'm going to call this one, make sure the emit is called logo spray paint as well, actually. Logo spray paint. Oh, I'm using very different separators on everything. It's pretty inconsistent, but anyway, it's fine for our purpose here. And the final check I will do is to see where in the timeline I want to cache. I don't need to cache all of the frames. So what we can do is we can go to the emitter logo spray paint. Check when it starts emitting on frame 100. So we can set this cache up to, build mode. And then if we have auto time here, can set that to 100 as the start. And then if I did 390, now that's not going to work because we actually got beyond that point. So if I scrub to that point roughly, in fact, let's just turn our emitter off for a second whilst I scrub around. Let's go to 375. I think it's over here by then. There we go. I hit playing. Now it's still emitting at this point, remember. It's just going to catch up with us. There we go. And if I drop just for this demo, I'll drop the count right down to 2000. You see, this is the problem. It doesn't like you to scrub around too much with X-Particles, so you got to be a bit careful. Tries to simulate for you and help you out. Okay, so here we see this is where the particles are dying off. And those are the last kind of particles that are dying off around about there. So I think safe to say around about 450 would cover us here. So in the stop, let's do 450. And then that should do us well. Let's go back to the beginning. Set the emitter back up to its 200,000. That's a lot of particles. But remember, they will be dying off when they hit that surface. So it's not like it's going to be exponential here. So I'm going to hit the build cache and we'll come back after that is done. Okay, so that cached pretty quick, 3 minutes, 10 seconds. And now we can just double check our cache is working nicely. There we go. Excellent. And that's looking all good. Now remember, because we haven't cached beyond the 400 frames or 450th frame, if I scrub beyond that point, my simulation will want to continue running. So that emitter will essentially be thinking that it needs to be alive. So what we do is we go to playback and we set that to hold. And that just means that when I scrub past that point, even though we don't have any more particles being added to the scene, that's not a problem. It just means that it saves us that problem. Now, did you notice something else there? So as I scrub back in the timeline, there was actually some particles floating in the viewport. That's because the emitter is technically active at this point. So you can see I've kind of got these weird particles floating. This is not in my cache because we're not cached up to frame 100. So something else we'll probably want to do is we'll probably want to change the emitter into And this is just a hazard of caching later in the sort of sim. We'll probably change it to controlled only mode. And what this is going to do is it's just going to be fed information from the cache. It's kind of similar to using like an initial state type deal. And that means that basically it's not going to, I mean, it's there when I scrub backwards, but it's fine. And I'm not going to be adding any more particles to the scene, especially past this point. There we go. Excellent. Okay, so that's our stencil ready to go. I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. We'll deal with materials and everything in the rendering chapter, of course. But now we're going to do pretty much exactly the same process. I'm going to get rid of that disk actually. So let's hide our disk over here. Just make sure it doesn't render. That would be disastrous. We can hide that one as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to start working on the graffiti. So let's clean up our scene a bit. Let's turn off this alembic. We don't need that at the moment. But what we do want is we want to utilize some of the other stuff we have from the shipping logo. So first of all, let's look at our graffiti setup. If you recall, I've positioned it up so it's where it needs to be. I think we might have done that in the last one actually. Either way, in the start file of this scene, these splines will be. Let's hide the original splines. There we go. Let me just see if you can see those. Let's grab the splines, highlight them. There we go. So yeah, we've got these two splines. We've got our source spline or our emission spline and our target spline. So it's exactly the same setup if you recall. I can turn off our shipping logo stuff for now. And I can even just turn off all the stencil stuff. Oh, I'm especially going to want to turn off the stencil because I do not want the stencil to collide with our particles. So we're actually done with this colliding stencil over here. We can turn that off. We can hide it. We can turn off all the stuff so it's not generating. No problem. Make sure this wet map is off. I think they all are anyway. Yes, they are. And that's all good because we're not applying any particles or paint to a stencil this time. We are purely painting the particles onto this surface. So we're directly freehand spraying it on the surface. So, okay. So we've got the two emitters, two splines here. Got the emitter. We've got our clone there. There we go. And we're going to spray these on. Now, clearly, we need to do some things here. So you can see it's hitting our collider. But clearly it's not freezing. Now I've actually got these actions in here. So I've got this freeze action graffiti. So I can activate it, and that will hopefully freeze those now. There we go. And this is going to be a group thing again, remember? So essentially, in fact, if I just clear out that action, we'll just start from scratch because then that's going to be a lot safer. So I don't want the kill action active in this one anymore, even though that was assigned to the other emitter. I basically want to take all of these ones. So I want the group change and I want the freezing. There we go. So I can duplicate those. In fact, I want the life action as well. Do you remember the life action reduces the age of the particle and lets them fizzle out? So I'm just control dragging them into here. And we should rename these just so that it's really obvious which ones are which. You can use the naming tool for this if you want to do it, if you've got loads of these to name, but that's fine. I'm going to start naming stuff with the graffiti suffix, actually. That is a good idea to start doing that now. Just so that I can see when it's in the graffiti system, it's that. So spray paint graffiti. Excellent. There we go. And then we're going to have a graffiti wet map in a minute, but that's a separate thing. So let's turn these on and let's throw this into our collider here. So all those three in there. And let's just double check our groups. Currently we have no groups. So what we want is we want to go back up here and we're going to steal these groups as well because why not? They're already the correct names. So command up resets their names anyway. So that was a pointless exercise, but oh well. Let's call this graffiti spray group. I think it was called spray can group, right? yeah, spray can group. So graffiti spray can group. There we go. And then the painted group. I'm going with a prefix now. Definitely inconsistent. Painted. Really doesn't matter. There we go. And actually that color is probably similar to what I want it to be. I want it to be kind of quite a garish color. So yeah, in fact, let's, yeah, we could set that color up now. I think maybe just like a bright pink color, something like, we might tweak this in a bit, but that's not too bad. I like my HSVs. Just find a color that you're happy with, really, and then stick with it. Let's see what that looks like. Oh, the groups aren't even on. I'm not doing too well here, are we? So jump into the emitter, go into the groups tab and assign it to the spray can group, and then turn on the graffiti painted group. Now we could make this a different color now just to contrast so that we can see it when it's painted on here. And that group is the one that we're going to force the group change on. So if you can see here, it's defaulting to that one. So it's just a case of figuring out which bits need switching out. You could rig this to be a bit more efficient, but at the same time, I think this is a really quick process anyway. And there we go. So this is doing exactly what we want it to do. It's throwing particles onto the mesh. They're then fading away, but in the meantime, they will be generating the wet map for us. Let's set the wet map up, or the geometry for the wet map up now. So currently, can you see that we've got this huge wet map for the container, but we don't need it to be that large. So we can actually save quite a lot of data by changing it to container wet map. Can I still paste that in? There we go. Graffiti. Excellent. Probably missing a T or two, but we'll see. And then in our wet map, we're going to change the sources to not the painted group, but the graffiti painted group. And then in the actual, make sure that it's this wet map that's being created. Excellent. And then we can actually chop quite a lot of this off. So at the moment, if I go, let's go into a front view. So if I hit, F4, I will, is it F4? Yeah, F4, there we go. If I change the selection to a rectangle selection, tolerant only, and you can see the polys over here, 240,600, 240,600. 60,000, there we go. And then I'm dropping that right down. And you can see we could probably even get away with coming in closer, something like that. I mean, your mileage may vary depending on your scene, depending on your geometry and stuff, but I think the less, the better, frankly. Like, if you can kind of thin out as much of the simulation as possible, that's going to be better later on. So, it might be worth checking just to see how close it comes with the particles and stuff. I've actually kind of got a good idea that it doesn't come past this halfway point that much. So if I just leave it at this and then invert that selection, so UI, backspace. Now if you're pre-R20, you'll want to optimize as well just to clear the empty points. But I think I mentioned that before. So of course we know the drill now. And in fact, this should actually even start generating this wet map now. So if I just press play, it's going to be a bit slower. But there we go. You can see, oh, is it not generating our wet map? Let's double check things. Probably need to turn our wet map tag on. That's usually a requirement here. In fact, it's definitely a requirement. Okay, so let's go back. And it should feel a bit slower as it's calculating a lot more stuff. There we go. Now obviously we're emitting this at the very beginning, so we're probably going to need to retime this somewhat. But let's just double check that the wet map is being generated. Yeah, getting a nice thick splodge at the beginning there because it's spending slightly more time on that moment than it is before it moves. But that's looking pretty cool. Okay. I think that it's going to be quite nice when it jumps over to the other the other rig as well, it's probably gonna splatter a bunch of loose particles everywhere, which is gonna look pretty cool. There we go, nice. And again, you can play with the wet map settings if you want, have it kind of leak in a little bit further and stuff like that, but I'm quite happy with how that's looking. Awesome. Okay, so I think we could do a few things. We could either cache this right now, or we could change the timing and then cache it, which is what I think I'm going to do. So let's change that in the XP emitter. So first of all, let's get some stuff to reference our timing. In fact, first things first, let's turn our wet map off whilst we don't need it really. So let's scroll up here. Let's hide some of these things, fold them up. I do want to see our stencil, so I'm gonna show that because I want to see when that is last on and when we're going to start the animation for the graffiti. I'm just going to scrub along and let the doesn't matter too much. The particles can stop and start. So around here, this is where it's all vanishing. That's 500. I actually want to probably want to animate our can up at 500 and start painting about a second after, about 20 frames after. So I'm gonna basically make the particles emit at frame 520. I want to keep the end frame relatively the same, so I want it to be 300 frames on. So I could do it a few ways. I can just say plus 520 and then 520 in that one. And if I just go back to 0, come back up to 500 here, our particles should start emitting then. Perfect. But you'll see they're in the wrong position. They're actually aiming at the end of our X-Particles scrolling. So that's because, if you remember, our graffiti has some keyframes on it. Sorry, our cloner. So if I select all the keyframes, Control A when you're hovering over the timeline, or sorry, actually it's not really the timeline, it's like the power slider, I think they call it, the power bar. And in here, we actually see that we've got these key values and it's multiple values. Now, we can actually perform math operations on multiple keyframes or multiple values at the same time if we hit X and then whatever we want to do. So we want to do X plus 520. And now those keyframes, I don't know if it was obvious there, they actually jumped relative to each other plus 520 frames. So that one obviously was on frame 10. It's now on frame 530. This one was on on frame, well, it's got to be 520 minus 820. So that's fine. I think it's 390 actually. There we go. And now our particles don't start until they're down here. That's great. Don't worry about this. It's good that when you see those weird particles everywhere, that's because I'm scrubbing when I shouldn't really be. So here we go. Away our particles go. Start emitting at the right time. And there we go. So let's get it to animate our wet map at that point as well. Now, as a performance thing, you could also turn the wet map on at that point as well. So we could, at frame, let's say frame 529, we have a keyframe of off, and then a keyframe of on at 530. So that just means that performance-wise, that'll be a bit better to start caching from that point only. Now, one problem with that might be that we want to turn it off later on. No problem, we'll just take the keyframe off it. And we'll all be good. So let's start the keyframes, let's start the animation, and let's just double check our vertex map is being drawn. It is. Is it actually going to start moving? Hopefully. There we go. Yep. Excellent. And away it goes. Starts painting. So I'm pretty happy because I know that this rig has been used for another, the other simulation, and I knew that was pretty good. The timing was good on the fading, and we weren't, painting too thickly, and it was good. So I'm actually pretty happy to now cache this to an alembic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit pause on that one, and go back to frame 0. And then if I select our graffiti wet map, we can do the same operation now where we export to an alembic. So file export to an alembic, and then we save it in the same area. And I'm going to call this one, well, it's called graffiti already, but I'll just call it graffiti wet map. Press save. And now the keyframes that we want it to cache, we can do Well, we can do all the way to the end, that's fine. But we can start it at, start it at 500. There we go, nice and easy to remember. Selection only. Oh, that reminds me, UVs, I should double check my UVs. Thank you, export dialog. If I hit shift and double click this, you'll see, because we cut that in half, our UVs aren't filling the space. So thankfully the Alembic just jogged my memory there. What we can do is we can go to BP UV edit mode, select all of our polys, and then we just need to run this single command, which is fit UV to canvas. And now that's fitting across our canvas evenly. That was a good catch. Thank you. There we go. Back to this one. File. Let's just double check we're selecting the correct thing. Yes, all good. Export to Alembic. Back again. Doesn't remember the naming. That's not a problem. Wet map. And then again, 900. 500 to 900. Scale is all good. UVs fixed. Vertex maps, merge generated, all good. Press OK. And I'm going to let that cache out. It shouldn't take too long. But once it's cached out, I will come back and we will check it out and make sure that it's all good. And then we can add our graffiti can, of course. All right, so that's all cached out. Let's turn our wet map tag off. So actually, let's just kill that keyframe by holding Command Shift or Control Shift and hitting the keyframe there. And we're going to merge in our newly created Alembic, which is called, where is it? Graffiti wet map. It's 2 gig. It's not too bad. About the same as the stencil was. So merge that in. And then if you look, the offset is actually created automatically because I actually set that in the export options. Let's collapse some of these things and let's bring this down just below our other one. And let's scrub along a bit. There we go. That looks like it's in X-ray mode. Have I put a transparent material on that? Oh, interesting. Let's just hide the stencil for a second. Hide that. Oh, there we go. I was clicking on the wrong one. There we go. Hide that one. And if I click on the vertex map here that's being generated, scrub along, and we can see, lovely. That is doing exactly what we want it to. Beautiful. I mean, you could argue that we could subdivide that another level, perhaps, but I think I'm actually quite happy with that detail. Remember, it's paint, so it's kind of, you've got a bit of leeway here. Okay, great. So let's apply a temporary viewport material to that. This is the container wet map. Let's call that VP container logo. I'm going to duplicate that one. I'm going to change the color to like a pretty weird looking pink color. I've actually got that in the emitter colors, haven't I? So I should use that. Go to the groups. Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong one. In the graffiti groups, this color here is what we're going to be referencing. So yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with that color. Like I said, this is purely for viewport at the moment because we can change the colors to whatever we like in the render. So jump into the color here. Let's add it to our little color palette here. Just double click that, make sure it's on there. Oh, and then jump in here. We've got to make sure it's the right name. So this is Graffiti Alpha, and then this is referencing the incorrect wet map. We want to chuck it on to this one here. There we go. Okay, and I think we're going to have to nudge it forward a touch, but we'll see. Let's put the other one back on. There we go. You can see just where I had it set back a little tiny amount. We could actually just have it. Oops, wrong one. Grab the graffiti until it just shows over the top. It can be really fractional, and we'll turn the shadows off this stuff as well to make sure it doesn't overlap in the render. Okay, cool. That look is actually looking pretty cool. So from 520, press play, just have a quick look. obviously hardware render away to test it out. A couple things I'm checking here. The particles are rendering at the same time as the graphic is being drawn on. That's great. And just checking that the particles are in the right position as well. So, okay, that's cool. I think it's good time to perhaps cache those particles, just as we did with the other one. We're going to probably jump the amount. This won't be so important because we're going to be rendering these. We could probably get away with quite only a few of these. The real effect is the drawing on at the end there. So let's cache this out. So now that we've actually generated all our wet map data and everything, we can do exactly the same as we did with the shipping logo stencil one. We can turn all these off. We can duplicate the last one and change it to a kill action. Change it to kill particles. And then on this collider here, let's jump into the tag. This is what's going to happen this time. And just make sure they're all deactivated. Now, they're deactivated in the OM, so they actually wouldn't operate in here. That's fine. But I like to just double check. It's absolutely fine. There we go. So now when I press play, let's just jump to that 520 mark. Our particles should not create a new group. They should just die as soon as they make contact, which they are. There we go. There we go. And on comes our painted surface. Graffitied. Terrible people, obviously, making a mess of this poor container. So let's cache that out. I'm going to probably just double the amount of particles. So let's go to 10,000. Let's create a cache object. And let's actually keep the naming somewhat consistent. Duplicate that name. Paste it into this one. And instead of the any logo, it's going to be graffiti spray paint. There we go. Let's include just the graffiti emitter. So let's change that mode to include in the inclusion tab. Go to the object tab. We're all good. Excellent. And I'm going to build that now. Let's just double check everything's off so that it's not going to take longer than it needs to. Excellent. I can even turn these off whilst it's caching, just to keep things nice and snappy. Excellent. Okay, so I'll build that cache. I'll just check only same system just in case, no problem. Oh, when am I caching? That's a good point. So currently I would cache the whole timeline. So actually we don't want that. Let's turn auto time off. Let's start at frame 100 and end on frame 900. And then we can just skip to that part. Okay, I'll see you in a minute once this is cached, and we'll double check everything, add our can, and then we'll be ready to render stuff. So build cache, see you in a minute. Well, that one was so quick, it almost didn't warrant a pause, but it's absolutely fine. It took 1:30, which makes me worry that it didn't cache anything, but it looks like it did. There we go, scrubbing. I can see that it's caching. It's sending the particles into the right spots. Let's turn on our wet map alembic just to see that. Oh, beautiful. Look at that. Excellent. So I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. Okay, so obviously last thing, we need a can to make this look believable. I say believable. A bit more grounded is what I'm thinking. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this stencil spray can rig, which we folded up earlier. And let's drop it into here. We can just minimize our stencil rig. Open this one up and let's start renaming these things. So this one is graffiti rig. And instead of the this timing that's going to be on these cloners, we want to utilize the timing that's on our graffiti cloner. So we're actually going to, well, first of all, actually, what I could do is I could just copy and paste the keyframes. Although actually, to be honest, that's a bit risky. So no, I'll tell you what, let's do the safe thing. Let's get rid of this target here. Let's press Shift G and delete this one here. I've just got to remember all these settings, haven't I? That's the only problem. It's going to be fun. And let's duplicate this graffiti one here. I can hide that. We should call this one emitter, because that's actually the one that's emitting stuff. This one, let's make it our target. And let's duplicate another one, get rid of its child. Sounds pretty bad. Let's not do that. Spray can. There we go. Drop the spray can inside. And just as it is now, if I just press play, you'll see, do you know what, that kind of looks like silly string. And that would work quite nicely here, but maybe for another time. It's kind of fun pointing the can in that direction. Okay, so away that goes. And now we need to assign our effectors to this cloner. Oops. I'll just drag them in. There we go. I think they're in order. Turn them on. And it's vanished. Of course, if you remember, we actually have scaling up and scaling down keyframes. Now, in this particular one, I think it's probably going to be a little... Well, actually, let's just scroll up to where do the particles stop? So start fading into there. So let's do from 830, and I can just, you see we've got these existing keyframes, just drag those to here. Oh, my timeline's actually a bit snipped there. And then grab these ones, and then we'll bring those up. I think, like I said, I think it's going to come on at 500. Is that what I said? Yes, I'm going to say yes. Up it comes. There we go. Now the target looks definitely wrong, so I have to sort that out. But the motion looks pretty good. I'm just going to turn the delay off for now. And the spray can target is listless. It doesn't know where it's supposed to be looking. So if I jump into the Espresso tab, you'll see it's because we've removed the cloner object that it was referencing. So all we need to do for that is actually swap the target back over. And on this one, if you recall, we need to change the spline from this particular one to the target spline. We don't need all the align stuff. I can just clear that out. Turn the align clone off. That's all good. And then we can actually check our null, and that looks like it's in the right place now. There we go. Is that going a bit early, perhaps? The can is a little delayed, remember, so I might... That looks like it's going a bit early. Let us double check. I'm just making this a bit more visible so I can see it move. Yes, that certainly looks like it's moving too early. If I changed the actual keyframes on these, I don't think so. Let's just do a quick diagnosis of what's going on. It might just be that I've got the delay. Oh, I've got that turned off. No. Oh no, that's fine. It looks delayed, but if you recall, the actual can is, yeah, look, it's on. Remember, the particles have time to travel, so that looked a little bit like there was a delay, but there wasn't. So actually, we're all good. Perfect. And then I want it to scale down. Could it go down a bit earlier? Perhaps it could. No, I think I'm going to leave it like that. That's fine. And what I can do is I can cache those down. So let's say put the delay effector on and the cloner itself with the can. I'm going to right click again. I'm going to add a MoGraph cache. Build that cache. Now I could build that from a specific range. In fact, I should do that. What am I doing? Here we go. Let's go 500 to 900. Bake only those. And if you look at the tag, it's red when we're not in that zone. When we get to the cached area, which is here, you see it goes green? Then that's perfect. And that's not a very large cache. You can see, because it's only dealing with the PSR of the can and the color as well. Actually, I should... Oh, in fact, that's a good point. I cached that before I set the color. Let's set the color to that nice, beautiful pink color. And there it is in there. Double click it. There we go. Let's recache that. As I was saying, There we go. Yeah, 300 kilobytes onto your scene is pretty minimal. It's not really much of a problem, especially when we're dealing with caches of gigabytes of data. Okay, so there we go. There's our, let's hide those splines. Let's stop breaking the illusion. There we go. Now it's a free floating can painting X-Particles. I can hide that target. It's a bit distracting. There we go. Excellent. Right, so I think we are pretty much ready to render this. So let me just double check things. Let's put everything on, see everything come together. This would be the optimal time to do your hardware renders and stuff like that, just to double check everything. So we've got our stencil, our wet map. Let's turn that back on. Okay, and we could put our scene back on, although do I want... It might be a bit heavy on the playback, we'll see. So just to show you this scene, it's just purely this container, and I've instanced it a few times. And if we jump to our camera, if I click on this camera here, I can just go to shot camera. I'd set this up before, so it should be good. Oh, there's no particles. So the particle cache, sometimes you have to reassign, just make sure it, to make sure it finds the, that's interesting. There we go. So I just toggle that cache on and off. That should not be there. There we go. Press play. Oh, hang on. The emitter is emitting when it shouldn't be. It feels like it's not using the cache at the moment, so I may have just toggled something off somewhere and not paid much attention. Perhaps if I set the playback to the same time, actually, that would probably help us out. There we go. Yeah, so if you want to just ensure you don't get things like that, just make sure the playback is matching the cache stuff. There we go. Perfect. I'm just scrubbing along here. Obviously, hardware render would be the best thing to do here. And then you get that beautiful peeling moment. We'll deal with the materials on this all in a second. And along comes our graffiti artist to ruin whoever did that nice stencil. It's ruining their work. Although, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to call this part finished, and we will now jump into materials and rendering, and it won't be too complicated, and I'll do the After Effects, any kind of flares and stuff in the same part as well. Okay, see you in the next video.